Authors Afternoon, a hallmark initiative of the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. Today's session is in association with Taj Bengal with the support of Ehsaas Women. It is an honor to have with us Rakhshanda Jalil as the guest author this afternoon. But before we start, let me touch upon an integral aspect of the Foundation's ethos, music. And in relation to this, it gives me immense pride to state that Grammy Award winner and celebrated composer Ricky Cage has conceptualized and curated 12 pieces of music for the Foundation as a theme tunes for each month of the year. So the music of the month for July is a tribute to Punjabi folk music and is marked with the distinctive folk vibrancy of Bhangra beats. Now to introduce our guest author for this afternoon, Rakhshanda Jalil. Dr. Rakhshanda Jalil is a multi-award winning translator, writer and literary historian. She has published over 25 plays of our times. Bal Upar, a translation of Gulzar's collected works, and Love in the Times of Hate. She runs an organization called Hindustani Awaz, devoted to the popularization of Hindi Urdu literature and culture. She is also the editor of the Taj magazine. In conversation with her today, we have our very own Dr. Sangeeta Datta, Ehsaas Woman of London, who is a writer, director, independent filmmaker, and also a literary enthusiast. So without taking much time, over to you, Sangeeta and Rakhshanda.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here for Prabha Khaitan Foundation's Authors Afternoon. As I was telling Rakhshanda, this is the oldest literary strand, the first event with which PKF started, after which they've branched into so many different events. I'm just so proud of all the work that is happening, particularly the literary work that has been happening, not just in Calcutta where it all started, but not just in the metros where it spread, but to the smaller towns and other cities. So PKF now is really known as a champion for literature. It's a great pleasure to have Rakhshanda Jalil here this afternoon. Welcome, Rakhshanda. You're not a stranger to Kolkata, but welcome again.
Thank you.
We've crossed paths at different literary events, maybe even in London, but it's wonderful that we can have this conversation today. I think with that magnificent introduction that you gave, Esha, you're so prolific, you've written a lot. I always assumed that you'd done some bit of teaching, but that's not the case.
Actually it is, but first of all, a big thank you to the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. It's always a pleasure to speak at your events. I've spoken in Nagpur, Bombay, various places. And coming to Calcutta, of course, is always a pleasure. But to answer your question, actually I did teach. It was expected of people like me, someone like me, a nerd. I did rather well in my academically, my master's, and the obvious choice, the default option back in the day was teaching. And I do have teachers in the family, and academics seemed like the natural option. And I did try it first at Khalsa College in Delhi University, then briefly at the Aligarh University. And I felt like that there are enough bad teachers, and I just didn't want to add to the numbers. My heart was never in the job, and I knew I didn't want to do that. So, and maybe it came too easily, maybe, right after college, and, back in the day you didn't have to do an MPhil or a PhD. I did do a PhD later. We'll talk about that, maybe. But back in the day, you just done your MA, how old are you? And you're getting this job so easily. I see the mara-mari for it now, and there was no such thing. Delhi University had made it a fairly simple process. Maybe I didn't value it, or maybe I understood that I was not meant for it. I'm not sure.
But as I said, there are many events or experiences which must have turned you into the fierce champion for Urdu, Hindustani, a language which has been much contested, a language which falls squarely into the politics of literature. I'd just like to start with asking you about your early influences. Not everyone who's grown up in UP or Delhi is just so fond of their languages. Some of them don't even speak their languages, their mother languages. So there must be family influence, and I know your mother is a big influence there.
So, I don't know what it's like in typical Bengali homes, but I know south of the Vindhyas, you leave your chappal, your slippers outside when you enter the house. In my family, we left English outside. Yeah, like chappal utar ke andar ghar mein jate hain. There was no written down rule. And my parents were both perfectly literate and cosmopolitan people in their own way. But it was an unspoken rule that we at home will speak in Urdu, in Hindustani. Not chaste Urdu, not immaculate Urdu, but we will speak in Urdu to our parents. And outside the house, of course, English was a necessary evil. You couldn't do without it. So there was that. But I had a very gharelu Urdu. I had a very domestic, to some extent even now, I speak very fluently. But I don't have a critical idiom. So which is when I'm asked why I don't write in Urdu, it is because my entire education has perforce been in English. So my frame of reference, my vocabulary, my critical idiom is all in Urdu. So I increasingly access it. And to answer your question more directly, I did indeed come from a home where neither parent was directly involved in Urdu. My father was a cardiologist, my mother was a librarian in our school, DPS where I went. So neither of them had studied Urdu formally. But I remember Urdu books in the house, and again, I don't know what it's like here in Bengal in the state board, but the central government has actually in theory a third language formula. Schools are required in the middle school to teach another language. Increasingly, the default option in most schools is Sanskrit. I went to a school which offered a whole bunch of languages: French, German, Italian, Spanish, Punjabi, you name it. Urdu was one of them. And we had a certain Mr. Bhasin. He was our transport in charge. He was a refugee from the other side of the partition survivor, you can say. He used to pronounce alif as alaf. And that was my introduction to Urdu. But I owe Bhasin Saab, wherever he is, a huge debt of gratitude, because apart from the buses that he ran for our school, he was also our Urdu teacher. And from 6th, 7th, 8th, I studied Urdu with him.
That's so interesting. You said earlier on that you did your PhD much later.
Yeah.
So I think our trajectories are very different, because I went straight from university into the UGC program on my PhD, and you took it up much later. I'm sure there are advantages, because you must have soaked in so much more, and your thinking is far more mature, and you are more convinced about what you want to do. So when you actually started working on the progressive writers of India, it's a segment of literary history which absolutely fascinates me, and IPTA along with it. What was it that really brought you to this particular subject? I don't think anything much was written on it at a time when you did your PhD.
Yeah. Let me first talk about doing the PhD so late in life, 20 odd years after a master's. So, I think as a nation, now I'm seeing a little bit of a change. People take a gap year, a year or two as a gap year. But in my time, it was all cut. It was very linear. It was like BA, MA, MPhil or PhD, and there you are. And I don't quite see the benefit of that, especially there is no age bar for higher education. Of course, there has to be an age bar for elementary education, because you need to start your schooling and so on at a certain age. That goes without saying, and there's good common sense and logic behind it. But there's absolutely no common sense and no logic in wanting to do your higher education right away, I think. If you give it some time, you ruminate over a whole bunch of things. You choose your subject, or as in my case, the subject chooses you, Otherwise, I see a lot of people, and I think I met some young people here from one of the colleges. To you especially, I want to say this. I see so much confusion and turmoil in the choice of the MPhil and the PhD subject, because you haven't thought things through so much. And somebody like me who does it 20 years later, so it's like soil that's lying fallow, you know. No education goes waste, and neither does time. If you're putting your time to good use, if you're reading, and you're reading voraciously and eclectically and seemingly randomly, yeah? But I think somewhere it comes together. I think I see those 20 odd years as a parcel of land that is allowed to lie fallow. You know, it doesn't become a wasteland, it doesn't become banjar, it doesn't become a desert. It just gets time to rejuvenate itself, and when you throw the seeds on it, they sprout, I think, that much more healthily, vigorously. Certainly that's what happened to me. And the route I took to PhD was a very circuitous one. In those 20 odd years while I was reading randomly and so on, I was also translating. And I think the choice of my thesis, which was the Progressive Writers Movement, revealed itself to me, because by then I'd read so many people that I hadn't consciously thought of as progressive writers. I mean, Saadat Hasan Manto, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, Krishan Chandar, Rajinder Singh Bedi. Who are these people? They are all progressive writers. You know, the partition crop of writers that we have. They are all progressive writers who are interpreting the events that are leading up to the partition, and then they are interpreting the nation building project in different ways. So all of these people that I was just reading as fiction writers, as it turned out, were maybe showing me the way. The way being this. And again, I want to say this here, you know, there's great joy in reading for the sake of reading. When it's not tied up with gainful employment, when it's not necessarily tied up with promotions and jobs and, you know, climbing the ladder and all of that. Nothing wrong with any of those things, but there is great joy, great liberation, great freedom in reading for the sheer pleasure of it. So in my 40s, with 2 small children, a household to run, various family responsibilities, I took a year's leave without pay from the place where I was working. And that's when most of the reading and research and the travel related to the research happened. And then, if you know Delhi, there's a place called the India International Center, which is my adda. And there, in the library, they rent out these little cubicles, tinier, maybe smaller than this stage, or just about the size of this stage. And so I rented that for 6 months, and that was my space, you know, where I actually just sat down, shut out the world. Kya khana pakega, kya groceries aayengi, kaun bill dega. I don't know how my children were raised, I don't know how they passed exams. But I closed myself, shut myself away in that space and wrote my thesis, and I think that was the best time of my life.
That sounds inspiring. I'm sure lots of people here would be inspired. It's true, no boundary to education and learning. But about the book, is it directly your thesis or?
Yeah, I based the, let me tell you very briefly what the PWA, the Progressive Movement, is. 1936, 10th April, the first of its kind meeting happens in the Rafaya Hall in Lucknow, and it's an All India Progressive Writers Association meeting. Premchand, who's going to die 2 months later, who's a lion in winter, he's a big name, and he's a pan-Indian name, not just a Hindi writer. He comes to give the presidential address of this first All India Progressive Writers Association. Delegates have come from all over the country. Very vigorous PWA in Calcutta, as you would know. People have come from Odisha, from Tamil Nadu, from Maharashtra, all over the country, all over undivided India. And what is Premchand telling this galaxy of writers? He's saying, हमें खूबसूरती का मयार बदलना होगा. We will have to change the standard of beauty. We will no longer go looking for beauty in these moon maidens with long hair and almond eyes. We are going to look for beauty anywhere and everywhere that we find it. If we find beauty in a woman who's got sweat on her brow and she's suckling a child and she's working in the field, let her also be the subject of your literature. So, in other words, what Premchand is telling this galaxy of writers, that let literature be socially engaged, socially purposive, ज़मीन से जुड़ी होनी चाहिए, समाज से जुड़ी होनी चाहिए, and let literature hold up a mirror to society. And in that mirror, you see everything that is in your society. Good, bad, indifferent, whatever is there around you must be reflected in your literature. So essentially what the progressives are saying is that art for art's sake, बहुत हो गया, it won't work, let it be art for life's sake. And so they say, let us draw our inspiration from life, whatever life has to offer. Yes, a great deal of the progressive literature is left-leaning. Yes, many people in the PWA are either communists or communist sympathizers, or what I like to call fellow travelers, but not everybody is. Instead, what it caters to is a worldview. Yeah? A worldview which is left, which is liberal, but which is also deeply human, which is very humanitarian, which makes common cause with all the big isms. And what are the big isms in the 1930s? Anti-colonialism, anti-fascism, anti-imperialism, feminism, land reform, nationalism, everything. So they are saying nothing is beyond the ken. Anything. Khwaja Ahmad Abbas writes an autobiography, and that gives you a clue to the movement. He says, I'm not an island, which means anything and everything in the world is of interest. And that's what the PWA does till it, I won't say it dies, but yes, it shrinks. I'm sure there's a PWA in Kolkata today. There is an All India Progressive Writers Association, there's an elected General Secretary. It's no longer the force it was, because we are in a different world, our concerns are changing. But yes, I think, I can't say that progressivism dies, finishes. Yeah. It may diminish, it may shrink, just as the left has shrunk in importance. But ideas don't die.
Worldviews as well, I think.
They may change.
Like he was saying, because they were Indian writers, but they were interested not only in the changes within the country, but a lot of things which were happening globally at that time. And a lot of that worldview has changed or shrunk now. And I think we should really resist that as much as we can.
But Calcutta is holding out.
Calcutta, we are privileged really to be in the city. There's so many reasons why we are. I'm sure you know them. So from the progressive writers and IPTA, which for me is that special segment of performers and the theatre tradition and the music and all of that, which was so progressive, so revolutionary in many ways, I think two other strands emerge which then move to your other books. One, of course, is feminism, because you've got this book on the early feminist writer, which then moves to Ismat Chugtai. So there's one strand there. And on the other side, you've got nationalism and post-partition and your very compulsive engagement with partition themes. So tell us whichever one you want to start with.
Okay, let's talk about IPTA. How can we not talk about IPTA sitting in Calcutta? I'm sorry, I need to think to say Kolkata. Calcutta seems to come more naturally to me. But in 1943, when the great famine is raging in parts of Bengal, not far from here, a cry goes up in the country. It says, Bhuka hai Bengal. Yeah, this is part of a fragment of a poem by Vamik Jaunpuri, an Urdu poet.
And written during the famine,
Just
or after
before.
the famine?
Just before. I mean, before as in while it's raging, while it's at its peak in 43. And Bhuka hai Bengal, which is also then subsequently set to music and sung like a ballad. This is taken up by P.C. Joshi, and 43 when IPTA is formed. There are these traveling troops that travel all over the country. They raise funds, they sing songs with very rudimentary peasant-like instruments, but they draw attention to this huge man-made tragedy that is raging across the countryside and in Calcutta as well. And Bengal then seizes the national imagination, and the fact that large numbers of people are suffering and dying of starvation while ships laden with grain are parked in the harbor, not allowed to come in. So what are the reasons, what are the economics behind it, what is the politics behind it, what are the historical reasons behind it? all of this coalesces, comes together with a cultural movement, the likes of which the country has not seen before. So IPTA is formed actually out of that one impulse to lend support and solidarity to the people who are dying of starvation in the Great Bengal famine. And it has ripples all over the country. Bombay, which is the cultural capital, the film industry is there, a very vibrant Progressive Writers Association is there. Imagine Bombay has these three concentric circles. The who's who of the Bombay film industry are at any given time Prithviraj Kapoor, I can go on with the names, Bimal Das, so many of them. They are active members of IPTA, they're active members of the film industry, and they're equally active members of the Progressive Writers Association. Films are being made which are drawing attention, and as the famine abates, other forces come into play, right? So it's not famine with time, its implications, its repercussions diminish, but poverty doesn't go away, hunger doesn't go away, unemployment doesn't go away, corruption, all of these things which are issues which are stalking the country are picked up by cinema, by theatre, by musicians, by writers. So think of it as three circles with overlapping memberships. The IPTA, the film industry, and it's not just Bombay. The Madras film industry, Calcutta, the one in the Bengali film industry here, the Marathi industry, the Gujarat, and Gujarat again has a very active theatre and film industry, as well as the Hindi film industry in Bombay. They are all contributing to this growing awareness that art in its broadest sense has to kind of have a social concern behind it. Yeah? So all of these things are coming together. And then we come up to the very tumultuous, very scarred years, the partition. This is a seamless movement. The concerns that are raised in the first 1936 PWA conference are concerns that are flagged by repeated generations of writers. Writers are the conscience of society, you know. Writers are they have the finger to the pulse of whatever's happening in the country. So in the years leading up to partition, as there are communal riots, as the two-nation theory is bandied about, as the country is split into three parts, India of course, but East and West Pakistan, the two arms of the country that face the bloodiest riots here in Calcutta, and then Punjab, which becomes a kind of bloodied corridor through which caravans of people go from here to there and there to here. Now these big tragedies are not happening in isolation. Naturally they find representation in literature, in the arts, in cinema. And to be honest, the people of that generation are very faithful chroniclers of what is happening there. And we have Jadavpur University, last that I heard, I'm not sure now, was among the earliest that was offering courses in partition studies. So the academics, the universities have also followed up on the work of this partition generation of artists, writers, filmmakers, that now academia has stepped in and said, let us offer you courses on this. Why? So that we don't make the same mistakes. Because history has lessons. It's a different matter that we don't always learn from history. But people have done their bit in trying to say that these were terrible mistakes and we ought not to repeat them. Let's not forget the lessons that this very bloody chapter in our history taught us. And I think that is why these partition studies and these partition novels, partition literature, partition cinema, all of this is important, because I don't think those scars and those wounds ever went away. They kept manifesting. There were scabs that we could scratch and there would be a fresh wound. So every time there was a riot, whether it was in Moradabad or Ahmedabad or Nalli massacre or you name it, you just had to scratch that scab for it to start bleeding again. The great pity is that the lessons that were there were never fully learned.
yeah, that's pulling me to another question, but let's take this. This appropriation of Urdu. Let's talk about that, because in a way Urdu has been, as you said, and many other people have said, many other writers, they've taken trouble to explain that Urdu doesn't really belong to a particular region. It's spoken in different parts of the country. It's just sad that later it's been identified with a certain community, which is a falsity. So are you going to read from the introduction?
Sorry, I was just, please carry on. You asked.
No, I thought this was
finished. That is, okay. Yeah, so a lot of people wonder about my so-called obsession with Urdu. I mean, I was this master's in English, was teaching English. What happened? Why did I fall by the wayside? Why did I become this person so obsessed with Urdu? No, I'm not obsessed with Urdu, but I think I'm uniquely placed insofar as I have access to two languages, and I think I enjoy accessing Urdu literature and making it accessible to those who don't read Urdu. So over the years, it's a skill that I've just simply developed, honed from 1992, when I first published Premchand's Urdu short stories. We think of him as a Hindi writer, but don't forget, he started out as an Urdu writer. So back in 92, I translated some stories under the title Mandir or Masjid, Temple and the Mosque. Happy to say 30 years later, it's still in print. Every 10 years, HarperCollins brings out a revised edition with a new cover, and it says something that there are enough people interested in this kind of literature. So yeah, it's not an obsession, it's a continuing interest, and if you permit, let me read out from this book, the one that we're supposed to be talking about later. But it might help you understand why I find that Urdu is a mine that I can keep mining, and it will keep giving me something or the other, year after year, decade after decade. But why Urdu, you might ask? I counter with, why not Urdu? What better representation will one find of a pan-Indian language, one that is not confined to a state or a religion, but one that is willing to be embraced and owned by anyone who wishes to do so. Moreover, here is a language that has honed itself over centuries to reflect not one or two or three concerns, but a range of topics and themes, not to mention tones and tenors. Given the Catholicity of its concerns, given the fidelity with which it reflects the good, the bad, ugly, indifferent face of society, given its dogged refusal to be tied down to a caste or community or state, it seemed like a good idea. What Mirza Ghalib had once said for the spoken word can well be said for Urdu poetry. And I'm quoting, "देखना तकरीर की लज्जत कि जो उसने कहा, मैंने ये जाना कि गोया ये भी मेरे दिल में है." The poet knows that this is what you have in your heart. What does the poet have? He just has a facility with words. He is not saying something new. He's not a prophet. ऊपर से वही नहीं नाजिल हो रही है. A revelation is not coming to him. He is feeling the same thing that you're feeling. All he has, this ability that you may or may not have, to give expression to a feeling that is actually in your heart. And that is what Ghalib is saying. Goya ye bhi mere dil mein hai. I too have it in my heart. For indeed, the Urdu poet has written something for every occasion, every sentiment, every impulse that flickers through the human heart. There may be plenty one might disagree with, but there is always something to be found on nearly every subject. Nothing is beyond the pale. Nothing is sacrosanct or unquestionable. And that's the thing about Urdu. I find that, to use a word that is so loaded and I use it with caution and fear, holy cow. There are no holy cows actually in Urdu. The Urdu poet and the writer is actually, I think, one of the most fearless people that I've encountered. In this book later we talk about the mehkhana, the sharab and all of that, the wise, the preacher. these have been metaphors in Urdu poetry for far too long, you know. I mean, they're busting every stereotype. And I thought that was a very unique, very attractive quality of the language. And so against the grain. People think of Urdu as this ishq mohabbat ki zaban. Yes, there is a great deal of romance. Yes, there is a great deal of fine poetry, which happens to be romantic poetry written in Urdu. But there is a great deal more also. It's such a pity. It's like women, you know, if you're beautiful, then that's what you are. You're a beautiful woman. Your other sterling qualities are seldom looked at. And I think that's the great tragedy of Urdu, that people have seldom seen beyond its so-called beauty and its so-called felicity with words and its great ability to convey romantic feelings. There is political muscle, there's women bigger, there's a great range of concerns, and there is an open mind, most importantly.
But a lot of it has to do with with popular culture in Urdu as well. And you've already mentioned the film industry, so the poets who were the songwriters in the 50s and 60s and 70s and even later have given us this sense of romance and some stereotypical ideas about beauty. A lot of things have changed recently because Urdu words have gradually started disappearing, and there are certain writers or sects of people who feel that Urdu has to be taken away, or there has to be some sort of cleansing happening to the language. And I find that particularly strange, but it's visible.
Yes, Urdu is there not just in cinema industry, but the Urdu writers, the film lyricists have done huge service, I think, in keeping Urdu alive. In difficult times, every time there was a war with Pakistan, Urdu became the enemy. It's strange, you know. I mean, there's no logic for it, but that's how it is. So it's the film industry that's kept Urdu going, and we owe a huge salute to all the filmmakers, Kaifi Azmi, Sadat Jafri, Akhtar Liman, Neeraj ji. I mean, I can go on, Majroo, Anand, Kalyan ji, Anand, no, they were music directors, but they were composers. But I mean, you name it. So, and remember a time when Doordarshan had not started. I remember a time when the Pan Ki Dukan had a transistor or a radio, and it was playing film songs. And so through that radio, through that Pan Ki Dukan, through that transistor, these words were going into the nooks and crannies of the popular imagination. They were crossing the Vindhyas, they were going where government policies could not go. When the central government wanted to impose Hindi, there were riots in Tamil Nadu. But when the radio, or whether it was Radio Ceylon or any radio, All India Radio was playing Hindi film songs, there was no objection. So that is the reach of cinema as a medium. That is the reach of the airwaves, you know, of what is being made accessible. And also, popular is not necessarily pedestrian. You know, that's a mistake we sometimes make. That what is popular is it's catering to the lowest common denominator. Not always. And the Hindi cinema has taught us time and time again that they are, when they get it right, they truly get it right.
Yeah, and true. And some of the best poets actually moved to Bombay. So there's that sort of exodus which happened at a certain point when so many writers and poets moved to Bombay to work in the industry. So standards had to be high, I'm sure. Yeah, there's so many questions. But while we are on the film industry and songwriters, you've done so much of close work with Gulzarji, and I think a lot of people here would be interested in knowing about that process. Yeah, but both are giants of contemporary Urdu literature.
Yeah, with Gulzar Sahab, I have done one book to mark the 70 years of the partition, some years ago, 5 years ago actually. It's called Footprints on Zero Line, and we chose his poems and his short stories which are specifically on the partition. The partition has left a huge imprint on Gulzar Sahab's mind, and time again he keeps going back to it, he keep circling to it in different ways. So that was a book I did the way one normally does, that you translate it and the publisher publishes it and so on. Then we decided that he wanted me to translate his collected works, Balopar. Balopar meaning all my fur and feathers. A very whimsical name that only Gulzar Sahab can think of. It just means all my fur and feathers, meaning all of me. That's what the book means. The pandemic happened shortly after we signed the contract. And Gulzar Sahab at that point was technically challenged. He could make a phone call, but he couldn't do more. He couldn't do Zooms and video calls and all of that. But he learned. So I, in my home in Delhi, and Gulzar Sahab in Bombay, every day we would meet from 3 to 5. My home would come to a standstill. Everyone would be told, you can hear if you want, but don't speak. You can hear Gulzar Sahab on the, on the video, but you're not supposed to speak. Nobody's supposed to speak. 3 to 5 we would work. I would translate whatever I had to. Balopar is a collection of 7 books. So let's say I'd finish work on one book of 200 or 150 poems, send it back to him. He would read it very carefully, and then on the video we would go over it. And this was like having a master class in translation. I'm not a poet, I'm a prose writer. I don't understand poetry beyond an appreciation of poetry, but I think you need to have it in your DNA to write poetry, and I don't have it. But working with him, I understood how you can knock off a word here, a word there, which I wouldn't have the liberty of doing because it's not my work. But when the master, the poet, is sitting there and saying, "Isko uda dete hain," I will dream of doing that. But he's saying, "Isko uda dete hain," and then you take it out, and the sentence feels lighter. It's floating. Until then, it was this heavy, turgid thing. And what did we do? We just knocked out a word here. But I had the permission of the living poet. And that was my one experience of translating with a living person. I've translated other people, but either they were not invested or some were not alive, some were somehow said, "Aap jo kar rahi hain, theek hai." But Gulzar Sahab and I went over every line, every word, every comma, every space, and I understood how a poet thinks and how differently they think from a prose writer. So that was great fun. It has about 740 poems. Yeah, it's a big fat book. And it took us the best of the lockdown period to work on it. But it was great fun.
And Balopar was the last one that you worked on with Gulzar.
Yes. It's the collected works.
Yeah.
So we are waiting for him to write more poetry.
That's amazing. The question that I had about Ismat Chugtai and the early feminist writer, tell us about that. What's your investment in feminism, in searching for voices which have spoken about the emancipation of women?
So, because increasingly my frame of reference was Urdu, I was struck by how there has been a kind of a vocal masquerade. We've had men speaking up for women, about women. And I was struck by the occasional benign patriarchy. Good men, kind men, nice men speaking up for women speak very differently from women speaking up for and about women. So I went looking for early feminist voices in Urdu, and I wanted to know how they are different from male voices. Let me give you a random example from the top of my head. Krishan Chandar, a good person, not a patriarchal person, an enlightened person. He's writing the foreword for his friend Ismat Chughtai's short stories, Choti. And in the foreword he's saying, Ismat ki kahaniyan, let me say it in English, Ismat's stories are as complicated as a woman's heart. Now I thought, only a man can say this. A woman's hips are wide, anatomically, because she's supposed to give birth. But anatomy has not told us anything about a woman's heart being different or more complicated or anything. So why do men think that women have a complicated heart? These small little triggers set me thinking. He's a good man. I'm not for a minute saying, and we are surrounded by good men. Many of us have good fathers, good husbands, good brothers. But when they say something like this, we know they're coming from a place where they don't understand. And this ridiculous thing of men are from Mars, women are from Venus, maybe it's true. I mean, who knows? So that was my impulse. I wanted to see how do early feminists in Urdu, writing in a milieu where there is parda, writing in a milieu where there is not that much, where there isn't equal literacy for men and women, writing in a milieu where there aren't that many women readers also to begin with. Who are they writing for? Are they writing stories only for women? Is Lihaf a story by Ismat only for women? Today is being taught everywhere. LGBTQ has adopted it as their, their story. But was Ismat writing for the LGBT? No, she says, I didn't even know what queer literature was back then, right? So, hindsight gives you the benefit. But it's important sometimes to go back in time and to see what were the impulses. Why were these women writing the way they were? Rashid Jahan, a doctor from Lady Harding Medical College in Delhi, a daughter of reform-minded parents. Her parents have set up the Women's College in Aligarh in the face of stiff opposition. She joins the Communist Party, becomes a full-time member. She's a doctor, she writes plays, she's a member of the PWA, she's a member of the IPTA. She's writing plays for radio. What are her influences? What has she read? Why is she writing the kind of stories she's writing? And what is she writing? Stories that we've not read before in Urdu. Why? Because we've never had a woman who's a doctor, who's so comfortable with a woman's body that she can talk about women's reproductive health in a very natural way without the ooh and the ah of it. So when she's writing a play called Parde Ke Piche, she's writing about closed societies, she's writing about the sexual health of women, she's writing about the reproductive health of women, but without any of that fake prudishness, with a complete matter of factness. She's locating a story which could not have been written by anybody before Rashid Jahan. Why? Because these spaces had not been explored. She locates a story between a prostitute and a young college teacher. Where do they meet? I mean, where can a young college teacher and a prostitute meet? In a public dispensary. There were no public dispensaries till that point. So these spaces didn't exist. Because these spaces didn't exist, these encounters didn't happen. Because these encounters didn't happen, these stories were not written. So you see, you have to join the dots. And that's when you understand that it takes a Rashid Jahan with all her benefit of her education, of being a lady doctor, of knowing that there is such a thing as a public dispensary, of knowing that people of all strata can come here, a prostitute can come here, and so can a young educated woman who works as a teacher come here. The story is called Wo. No gender. In Urdu, there is no gender in Wo. It can be man, woman, child, anybody. So the story Wo is a story that could only have been written.
Love in the time of hate. What I found fascinating were these Urdu poets that you have quoted, who've written on Krishna, who've written on Ram, who've written on Mahavir, and it just gives you that sort of multicultural ethos, and the fact that really Urdu or any other language doesn't belong to any sect or religion. It's about a culture, it's about a cultural fabric that people shared. Could we get the Krishna poem?
Yeah, we could do that. So
and then there's this fascinating bit about Bengal.
Oh yes,
yeah.
How can we not talk about Calcutta? So this book, Love in the Time of Hate, in the Mirror of Urdu, has 80 essays. They were not written overnight, they were written over a period of time, 3 years actually. Some were written by events in real time. Remember, there was an ad for Tanishq that was taken down, and a lot of fuss was made over that. Our newspapers every day give us triggers to write, to think, to wonder where are we going wrong. Our courts keep giving us bizarre judgments, making us wonder what are these guys thinking of. there is so much around us that makes us wonder, were we always like this or have we changed recently? And that's when I found Urdu came to my aid. For over 250 to 300 years, the Urdu poet has been talking about Samaj in its broadest, been talking about Mulk, nation in its broadest. We've had fine poetry on the Ganga, the Himalayas, on cities, on Mausam, Garmi, Sardi, Jada, Barsat, on a whole bunch of issues, on political events, on all kinds of events. So while I hope at some point you read these, if not 80, maybe even 8 to get a flavor. But to this audience and in this city of Calcutta, let me read something which is on Bengal Ka Jadoo, a whole essay on that. And I talk about how Bengal has cast a spell over the Urdu poet and seized the imagination of the Urdu poet for decades. And there is huge amounts of poetry. Let me read some of it. You do know that Ghalib came and stayed in your city. In 1827, he set out from his home in Delhi to come to Calcutta, taking a very long journey on the Ganga, partly on the river, partly on a cart, partly on horseback, and he came here. Tomorrow I hope to go see that place. In Shimla Bazaar, he rented a house and he stayed there. I hope to go see that tomorrow. So Ghalib has written a great deal on it. He's entranced by everything that he sees in Calcutta. Calcutta ka paan, Calcutta ki auratein, he thinks they are the most beautiful. Calcutta ki auraton ke baal, mangoes. I mean, he's a great mango lover, and he's had his fill of the daseris and the langras back home in Delhi and thereabouts. And in fact, he writes letters to friends, bhejo to bas aam bhejo, and when in season. But when he comes to Calcutta, he's entranced by the mangoes he finds here. He's completely enchanted by the printing press that has not yet come to Delhi. So printing is a new technology. He's completely taken in by the telegrams that have started. And even though he's short of money, he's constantly sending these very expensive and very long telegrams to his lawyer in Delhi about the case that he has come to do. So there's so many things in Calcutta that he's entranced by. And then back home, he keeps thinking about Calcutta, and he says, Calcutta ka jo zikr kiya tune hamnashin, ek teer mere seene mein mara ki hai hai. So you can understand what it means. And then there are so many people like this. Misle khushboo-e sabah phaili hui hai har taraf. This is Sayyid Ahmad Shamim, a relatively younger modern poet. Geswe Bengal ki khushboo hamare shahar. So any fragrance is then likened to the Geswe Bengal ki khushboo. People talk about the scent that is coming from her gali, Mehbooba ki gali, and that reminds them of the Geswe Bengal. So it's a metaphor, it's a motive, it's an image that doesn't have to be explained, because the reader and the writer both understand it's immediately evocative that Geswe Bengal refers to something. Again, a modern day poet who died some years ago, Shuja Khabar, says, "Aaj meri arz par zulfe agar khulega wo, kal hasad ki aag mein jal jayega Bengal." So you see, this goes on, and of course, as I mentioned, the qahat, the famine of Bengal, seizes the national imagination. It isn't just the Ipta people, it isn't just Vameh Jaunpuri's ballad Bhuka Hai Bengal, but huge amounts of poetry are written. And that again shows the solidarity people across India have with the people of Bengal, and how every time they eat a morsel of food, they are reminded that there are people who are going to bed hungry in Bengal. And many, many poems are written by wheat eaters about chawal. In fact, I found with a friend Devjani Sen Gupta and we are putting together a collection of writings of the Great Bengal famine. She is pulling them out from Bangla and I am pulling them out from Urdu. And we are struck by the large numbers of poems and short stories that I am finding, which are called Ek Pyali Chawal. So there are these people who usually eat wheat, they're traditional wheat eaters, but suddenly they're waxing eloquent about chawal because they understand what a grain of rice means to those who are deprived of it. So there is, of course, all of that. What did you want me to read? Krishna poetry. Okay. Okay, that's it. Okay. Well, there's huge amounts of poetry on Mahavir, on Krishna, on Ram, on Guru Nanak, on Buddha, of course. I was amazed by the amount of poetry on Mahavir in particular because, I understand that there is a Catholicism and an eclecticism, but the sheer numbers of poetry on Mahavir was a pleasant surprise for me. But here, let me read something on Vrindavan ke Krishna Kanhaiya Allahu. This is Nida Fazli, and this is the so the blue-eyed child God is an object of much adoration, much love. One man on whom I am presently working, my next book hopefully will be a biography on him, a man called Hasrat Mohani, a practicing Muslim who has gone to the Hajj 11 times, but who is a devout Krishna bhakt. He likes to go to Vrindavan for Janmashtami. He's a jail during the national freedom struggle. He died in 51. Whenever he's in jail and Janmashtami comes along, he's like this Birahani who's pining for her beloved. And he writes the most exquisite poetry for Krishna. And he sees no duality in the fact that he's this practicing Muslim who is the Daridar Panchvakta Namazi, and he calls him Krishnji Hazrate Krishnji Maharaj. Yeah? And in his mind there is no ambiguity, no duality. He's not the only one. Let me read something from, this is quite sweet actually, and I think easy to understand. It's called Krishna Kanhaiya. It is by Hafiz Jalandhari. It's a long poem, it's written like a love song. ऐ देखने वालों, इस हुस्न को देखो, इस राज को समझो, ये नक्श ख्याली, ये फिक्रत आली, ये पैकर तनवीर, ये कृष्ण की तस्वीर. O ye who see this beauty, understand this secret, this work of the imagination, this thought of the highest order, this embodiment of light, this picture of Krishna. I can go on, there's much poetry here, but maybe we can take questions. Yeah? Thank you for your patience.
Okay, we actually have an Urdu poet here.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Fantastic to listen to you. Absolutely fantastic. Sangeeta, if you've taken 1 hour, I can take 3 hours and just go on talking to you. And I can't help but
feed me for those 3 hours.
And I can't help but observe, either by default or design, how coolly you're wearing our Bengal colors.
Yeah.
And the red. And the red.
Yes.
2 things come to mind listening to you. One is, we have this beautiful trend amongst poets and writers. You had Badayuni, you had Ludhianvi, you had Akhtari Bai, Faizabadi, you had, all these people who hailed from their places and added it to their pen names. How has that completely kind of died out? That's one. And the second thing is more current, more modern. The way we are dealing with any language, not just English, Urdu, Bangla, any language, is that we are compelled to even take a word like okay and write K on WhatsApp. And I wonder what we do with those seconds that we save between okay and K. But basically we've dispensed with language and gone back to sort of cave language, everything is a thumbs up, everything is an emoji. So this dispensation of language, irrespective of which language, how is it going to pan out? Those were two thoughts, if you'd like to.
Very disparate questions.
Yeah.
The second one, I think we'll end up talking in grunts and sounds. Because we're doing away with so much that is good and fine and delicate and beautiful and nuanced. But we don't seem to want nuance anymore. We want to dumb down to an extent where a shrug and a grunt and a yes and a no will see us through. The first one was
the places?
The places. So I can give you a political answer and a sociological answer. The sociological one is about the pride one took in their home states and the whole Kaspati culture. Most of these Mohans and all were part of the Kaspati culture was mostly in the Awadh region. I mean, Hafiz Jalandhari and Sahib Ludhianvi are outside of Awadh, so it doesn't quite apply to them, but I think they are also drawing their inspiration from there. The Kasbas of Awadh were these amazing spaces that were very pluralistic, very Catholic, and they allowed a certain pluralism to sprout from their soil. So those who came out of these places, Hasrat Mohani, for example, and so many others, they somehow came out believing that the world was a very pluralistic, diverse space where multiples, a variety of people could coexist. And they drew their inspiration from there. So the Catholicity of concerns that I was earlier talking about. There is that. The political answer, I think, could be also that here was a lot of people who were dispensing with surnames. A surname is an indication of caste. I mean, even among Muslims who claim that it's egalitarian Islam and therefore there is no caste. But there is a clue contained somehow or the other in your name. So by adopting, I mean not always, but often, Khan or Sayyid or Ansari or whatever, are broadly speaking denominators of your position in the social pyramid. So that could also be a reason why they deliberately wanted to dispense with any marker of identity. It's like people using Kumar as a name, as a surname. So the deliberate decision to drop a surname, which is a marker of caste. And this is why people, both who are high caste and those who are not so high caste. And it works both ways. I know of people, I'm sure that it is here in Bengal as well, that even those who are, let's say, upper caste Brahmins will choose to do away with, I know that Kumar, for instance, works in that way. So it could be that. And I think we've come full circle. Now we take pride in caste. We want to draw benefits from it. It could be reservation and something as tangible as that. Or it could be just, I don't know, it marks your place in the world. So it's sad in a way that all those 80, 90, 100 years ago, we had a generation that was distancing themselves from caste. And we are going back and embracing it again. And we're wearing it as a badge of honor and displaying it on our sleeve. Whereas ideally we should be moving towards a more egalitarian society, but somehow or the other we're not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Adab, namaskar, and a very, very good evening. I have two submissions. One, you have absolutely mesmerized us, not just with the writing. We've read so many of your books and we're looking forward to reading this one, but also with your eloquence. So I would like to dedicate a couplet to you first. है और भी दुनिया में सखनवर बहुत अच्छे कहते हैं कि गालिब का है अंदाज़े बयां. So आपका अंदाज़े बयां सुभान अल्लाह. I come from a similar background. Parents are doctors. English was left behind outside the house, not with the chappals, but with the school bag, definitely. Convent education, a passion for Urdu that was taught and practiced at home. Today I am a professor of English. So my first question in fact to you is something that haunts me as an academic, because one of the courses I teach is translation. How much of the essence would you say is lost in translation?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, loss is inevitable.
Yes,
You know, but that shouldn't daunt us, that shouldn't scare us, that shouldn't inhibit us. Think of a world where we had not read Maupassant, where we'd not read the Russian masters, where we'd not read the French symbolists, where we not read us epics, all our what came to us as Panchtantra, as Nani Dadi ki Kahani, was all derived in one way or the other from our ancient Buddhist and Hindu texts. You know, from the Vedas, and they were made simple like Jatak Kathas and so on, and then they became these Nani Dadi ki Kahaniyan, and then Jayco and these Hind pocket books and others published them as cheap paperbacks, and that's how we accessed our earliest literature. But what is it? It is actually a work of translation. And those like you who have been students of literature, like me who've been students of literature, as an 18-year-old straight out of school, when you do English honors, among the earliest texts you read is Homer's Odyssey. You know, the Penguin Classics. What is Homer's Odyssey? It is a work of translation. And no one's holding you by the hand and telling you. I, living in Delhi, had never seen the sea till that point, and then Homer's taking me and showing me a world of the wine dark sea, and I'm amazed. Yeah, and I don't see that as a work of translation. And then I read Gorky and Dostoevsky. They're all works of translation, but they're standalone texts. Later I read the Spanish masters and this and that. And had I not read those, had any of us not read those, we would have, to use an Urdu word, been behroom, bereft. There would have been no cross-fertilization between our literatures, between our languages, between our literary cultures. If we had not read Tamil literature and Sangam literature in one way or the other through multiple translations, if we had not read Bengali literature or so much else, you know, I mean, you don't have to go outside the country, but within the country, the literature that has come to us. So I don't think we need to worry that much and be anxious about the loss. I work on the principle that loss is inevitable. Yeah, but the gains, are enormous. The challenge
as
is,
a writer.
As a writer, yeah. Well, as a writer, the first and foremost thing I find works is that I leave my sense of identity and self behind. This is somebody else's text that you are translating. It's not your text. It can never be your text. This is my text. The translated work is not my text. So I leave my identity, my sense of, oh, I can write better than this, I can fix it. No, you can't fix it. You can't gild the lily. You can't improve upon it. You can work with what you have. You think it needs an explanation, write an introduction, write an introductory essay, give footnotes, give a glossary, but you're not in the business of fixing it. You're in the business of allowing as much of a transfer as those languages allow. And languages as different as Hindi or Urdu from English sometimes can be prohibitive, can come in the way. You find ways and means of taking as much as you can across the barrier of language, across the barrier of literary sensibility. But yes, there will be a loss. Some loss will be there. But you try to make up for that loss by maybe earlier translators didn't think that footnotes have any place in translations. They thought footnotes are an academic thing meant for academic writing. I think even footnotes add to a translation because the text does not give you permission to enlarge upon an idea or a background or a context, but the footnote allows you.
Next question. Can I have?
This is connected to your observations and Shabina. You know, I agree with you that there has to be a loss, but
Not has to be, but is inevitable.
no. But I feel that if you're reading like translation, I'm reading Chekhov. I don't know Russian. Then my sense of unhappiness reduces because I have access to English, but I don't have access to Russian. Right. So I don't do a value judgment. But when I'm reading Tagore, I read Bangla and I read English. When there is a loss in translation, that gives me a lot of sadness. So where do I go as a translator? I mean, I'm asking you, for the reader, who I feel that if you do not have access to one language, either the target language or the language of origin, then it is, you know, a much better situation for the reader. But if you have access to both the languages, then I think the reader is rather saddened by the translation often.
Yeah. The sense of sadness that you are alluding to, I've experienced that. That usually only ever happens in the languages you know. In my case, Urdu and Hindi, right? So I don't see that, feel that sadness when I read a Marathi novel, you know, or a Tamil novel, or a Bangla novel for that matter, you know. I will only read it for readability. I will not be aware of losses per se. A false note may just hit me suddenly. Yeah, this is sounding crazy. I mean, even in a village, nobody's saying mate. It's too Australian, you know. Like we have yar in Hindi and Urdu. I wish the translator retained whatever the word is for. What is there a word for yar in Bangla? Bondhu. So I would have been happier if the translator said Bondhu. I'll understand. And even if I don't the first time, I will subsequently. You know. Similarly for father's elder brother, his wife, Taiji. So I don't want to hear aunt. You use what? Yeah, use that. Say Jeti. So when I started out all those years ago, the generation just before mine, I don't wish to take names because they're mostly dead and gone, but in Hindi and Urdu, these were the pioneers. But they were writing such clumsy sentences, lumbering up sentences with, he sat on a cot eating, what were they saying for roti? Something like unleavened bread which had been smeared with clarified butter. What is this? Yeah, say he was sitting on a cot eating roti with ghee. But that confidence, I think, comes with time. In the early 80s, when this gentleman who shall remain nameless was translating and being published, he was a pioneer. And poor thing, maybe he had to do all this. I have the benefit that today I have the confidence to say, I'm going to say Khalajan. You understand or you don't, you figure it out, she's some kind of aunt. I'll give the details of the glossary. You want to be very careful, you go back to the glossary right at the end and read it. Otherwise, you try and figure out who's Khalajan. It's suffice to say she's an aunt. That much you can understand. So I think with time, translators of my generation are getting this confidence that we are being more playful, more adventurous, more coming into our own. You know, we are taking, not liberties. I'm not for taking liberties. But we are allowing the spirit of the original to come through. Because we are not in the business of giving these standardized English texts, you know.
Yeah, translation has also been so much within colonial parameters.
Yes,
so unlearning that, breaking that.
The biggest challenge, Sangeeta, has been fighting with the bacha log who are now the editors in publishing companies. I mean, I have to say King's English, but what was Queen's English basically in my time. There was every editor in a publishing company wanted to flatten out your text and make it like this. So weed out all the whimsicality, weed out all the eccentricity.
So much is lost in translation, but immense clarity as far as Rakhshanda goes. Amazing eloquence. Very rare. I have the privilege of calling Rakhshanda friends for many, many years. This has been a wonderful afternoon. On behalf of the Taj and Prabha Kaitan, I'd like to thank Rakhshanda and Sangeeta for leading this forward. An amazing audience with such intelligent questions, which is not always the case. So a great afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Small one thing we'd like to say, Prabha Kaitan Foundation is delighted to announce that they also support specially abled boys and girls by giving them opportunities within their reach for their growth and development. They compensate them for the same to make a positive impact on their lives. The foundation promotes cross-state cultural understanding and appreciation and a mosaic of culture which forms the backbones of the nation, contributing to its vibrancy and richness. This is to support our ongoing efforts to foster unity and appreciation of the rich cultural heritage across India's diverse states through mementos, food, music and art. In this context, we would like to present Rakhshanda with one such giveaway, Dokra, on behalf of the entire team. Would like to request Mohan Chandran, the head of this area, to felicitate the author. And do not forget to take your signed copy before you all leave. Your mic, you didn't want to say dosha. You have said all the shouts.